How would you define poverty? Take a second to come up with an answer. Is it a familiar term? The common person might say that poverty is the lack of wealth and welfare, or homelessness or starvation. Yes, unfortunately this definition of poverty is correct. Yet we are only skimming the surface of what people in poverty experience in their lives. In these next few minutes, Olivia and I will go into depth of what exactly poverty means and how we should define and measure it.
Let's take a step back. Can poverty be measured? The answer is complicated. For many decades, economists, statisticians, and officials in the U.S. have been creating certain measurement methods to gauge how many Americans are in poverty and what constitutes being in poverty. In the 1960s, an American economist named Molly Orshansky and her research discovered that on average the typical American household spent a third of their income on food. From this, she found that by multiplying a household's grocery bill by 3, she was able to develop income thresholds, better known as the poverty line. This method was adopted by the U.S. and deemed the official poverty measure, or the OPM. However, the OPM was exceptionally black and white, and not to mention outdated. Although the OPM adjusts for the size of the household, composition, relative family ages, and inflation, it is a bit misleading because the attributes of poverty are different across time, and the OPM does not include non-cash benefits, nor is it internationally used. To add on, it only focuses on the income aspect of poverty, not all else that comes with that term. More on that later.
Now, because researchers have found the OPM to be too vague, the SPM was born, the Supplemental Poverty Measure. This too covers FCSU, food, clothing, shelter, and utilities, like the OPM, but it also accounts for cash income, food programs like SNAP, energy assistance, housing subsidies, FICA, and Social Security, and takes out the non-discretionary spending, including taxes, healthcare, commuting, and childcare, because those things are typically needed to budget out money for. Additionally, the SPM also accounts for all people in a household and the geographic locations of families. The SPM may also be more familiar since it is the main source of poverty data in the news and media. There are all other benefits that come with using the SPM because by incorporating the assistance programs, we can see what programs are helping with lifting people out of poverty while the OPM does not. For instance, the SPM has shown that Social Security is one of the most helpful anti-poverty programs, including 26.5 million people get out of the poverty threshold in 2020. Fox. Both the OPM and SPM are good for getting basic poverty measures, but is that really enough information to be able to fully measure and understand poverty?
Of course not. Those measurements are only really focusing on the financial part of poverty. Money might not matter when it comes to the well-being of a person, but that's not all. Wealth is not just measured on financial status, but on non-materialistic free entities. We mean the holistics: happiness, success, quality of life, and many more. All of these freedoms contribute to the well-being of a person because, as American philosopher Martha Nussbaum put it, these areas of freedoms are so central that their removal makes a life not worthy of human dignity. Those measurements also do not portray the many faces of poverty. In fact, the Census Bureau is often misleading. When most people think of being below the poverty line, they think of those in extreme absolute poverty. In reality, poverty is an umbrella term that covers all forms of deprivation, from not being able to cover the bills, for instance, to being homeless. To further this point, let us look at an argument of what poverty in the United States, at least in the early 2000s, looked like. Our arguer, Robert Rector, a senior researcher fellow for the Heritage Foundation, analyzed various pieces of data on what poverty looks like in the U.S. in one of his articles and made a case that poverty is not what the media paints it to be, but in many cases, those impoverished households do not have amenities. For instance, 84% of those below the poverty threshold had AC, 79% had TV, and 64% had a personal computer.
Rector claimed that a typical family in poverty was comfortable and had commodities, which is very different from the images of starving children in shacks on the television screen. His argument is a strong one, and the statistics he provides are all factual, But Rector fails to acknowledge is the behind the scenes of these statistics. Numbers only show so much. Could these people be making ends meet or have a low but secure income? Yes, but many could be struggling to pay the bills to afford those amenities. There's no information on the quality of amenities, or if the appliances that came with rented housing they live in, or the quality of running water, or the nutritional value of food that is on the table. The thing with poverty is it is so specific, generalizations are made all the time, and those of poverty are often overlooked. Earlier, we mentioned that OPM and SPM only focuses on the income aspect of poverty, and clearly that is not enough. So, what is the solution? There really is no perfect method, but the best way we have found to measure poverty is to go personal, to look at the effects on the individual, family, or specific geographic or demographic populations, and what factors lead to them being considered poor or the situation they are in. To do this, we recommend the capabilities approach, accompanied by what we think is the most accurate and dependable index tool, the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index. With these two methods, we firmly believe that poverty can be properly measured by getting to the details and respecting the individual by not categorizing them as vaguely as the other measurements.
First of all, what is the capabilities approach? As for definitions, Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum, two economists and philosophers that have specialized in the capabilities approach, define a capability as a way to represent the alternative combinations of things a person is able to do or be, as the various functionings they can achieve. As for functioning, these represent parts of the state of a person, the various things that they manage to do or be in a leading life. When someone has a functioning failure, someone might look into and see why there is a failure, and if it is a choice or not. Here is an analogy that Sen and Nussbaum used: the difference between fasting and starving. In both situations, the faster and the starving person are not eating, but the faster chooses not to eat, while the starving person does not have the choice to eat. In this case, we would not provide food for the fasting person, because that would be disrespectful to their lifestyle, and provide food to the starving person to help them, if they choose to accept the help. By focusing on the capabilities of a person instead of the functionings, like the source of food, we can avoid disrespecting anyone's capabilities.
Instances of capability failures can be very specific, but they need to be recognized and analyzed at this level to properly understand how to handle the situation to benefit the person the most. Nussbaum offers a list of 10 central capabilities that should be available to all people, which includes life, bodily health, senses, imagination and thought, emotions, practical reason, control of one's political and material environment, and more. She offers these central capabilities as markers for well-being because she believes that our focus should be on the protection of these freedoms, which are central to our lives, and the removal makes life not worthy of human dignity. People care about wealth, yes, but there is so much more in life that is enjoyable that all people should have the luxury to. Everyone deserves these freedoms. With these capabilities, people can excel to their highest levels of achievement and may be different for everyone. At least for those who are in total deprivation, by having these capabilities, they feel that they can be a part of their community and be able to appear in public without shame, and so on.
That brings in another point, the shame aspect of poverty, and why it is so important we work for the root of the issues to help people out. For those in poverty, oftentimes they feel isolated by society, that society is not accepting of their poor unless they are the blue-collar hero who pulls themselves up by their bootstraps. We recently read a memoir by Dorothy Allison, who recounts on her life in poverty and felt inferior to everyone else because of her situation. She mentioned the politics of they, the marginalized of the poor versus everyone else, and how dehumanizing it felt for her. So much she wanted to forget her identity. For so many people in poverty, it is traumatizing what they have to go through, and because it is commonly frowned upon in a capitalistic society to be poor, they feel ashamed and the need to hide from the public eye. This is not a good quality of life. This is agonizing, and no one should be made to feel this way by others, ever. Although because of the intricacies, this may not be fully feasible way to measure poverty, as Sean and Nussbaum recognize, but the capabilities approach is definitely something to keep in mind when assessing poverty.
As for a more traditional form of poverty measurement, we have the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index. The global MPI complements traditional monetary measures with acute deprivations in 3 dimensions: health, education, and living standards, instead of just assessing the income of a household, then breaking it down into 10 smaller subsets. Typically on the graph with the biggest segment/weights in the chart are nutrition, child mortality, and years of schooling and school attendance. This gives economists the ability to look at poverty at the individual level. If a person is deprived in a third or more than 10 of these indicators, they are considered poor. The global MPI also permits comparisons across country and world regions, ethnic groups, geography, age, and household characteristics, much more specific than the OPM and the SPM. This is also the best index for assessing people's situations, for it can help design policies more effectively to target the problematic areas. This measurement may not be in the media due to its bulk and information, but because of how particular it gets on deprivations, we feel it necessary to become the leading indexes for measuring poverty and what is fed into the mass media.
Poverty is prevalent in our nation. Roughly 37 million people are under the poverty threshold. That means that not everyone is at their rock bottom, but everyone under that threshold has a story, a reasoning for why they are in their certain situations, chosen or not. But the best thing that we can do is give respect and treat them with civility and equality. And by using the capabilities approach and the global MPI, we can evaluate their situation in a more holistic way and help them if they so choose, because all people deserve the best opportunities and happiness.